Test, test, test.
We're being recorded, I think. Welcome, Gary.
Welcome to
So-
you too.
It's good to be together again. I think that we can bring the meeting to order, and if you would all use your microphones just to call in for roll call, starting with Deb. I'm here.
Here.
That's Gary.
Carter's here.
Others here.
Here, Nona.
And Betsy. And now I would like to call for any oral communications that are out there. Not hearing any. I do have one. So as a resident I attended the town council meeting of a week and a day ago on Wednesday, the 24th of April. And I'm going to read to be more exact, some issues that I thought all the issues had, and this was a town council financial study that preceded the 7 o'clock meeting. All the issues had great implications for the residents, and you can watch this online through our YouTube channel. But it did include a matter of significant relevance to the Open Space Committee, and that's what I'd like to speak to. The town is entering its third year of a significantly growing structural deficit. The past 2 years combined amount to $1.3 million, and $1.5 million is projected for this coming year. The reasons for this aside, the town manager, Edmund, offered the council reassurance, and that was based on his proposal that we reorganize the town reserves. There was a slide that was entitled Town Reserves that included all the funds, from the 6 unrestricted funds to the 14 restricted funds. The largest of those, he noted, was ours, the Open Space Fund. What pertains to this committee was that the manager's recommendation, and in his words, he proposed the town turn off the 2% utility user tax faucet and direct the full 7.5% tax to the general fund. Independent of that, the complementary proposal on the table was to spend the Open Space Fund, to put those funds to use as opposed to keeping them in savings, which lose purchasing power over time. There were no details as to how the proposals may play out in this particular year or in the next few years, though the finance chair, who said, had been briefed, and the full finance committee will review the budget on May 20th. From there, it will move on to the town council. The town council will be meeting on May 22nd, which is a date shift to accommodate the town's desire to finish up the work that the planning commission did last night on the housing element final rezoning, and meet again. They will be meeting again after that. So in other words, on the May 22nd, I believe that the town will be, my guess is that they'll be focused on zoning. They'll meet again on May 29th and June the 12th. And after the rezoning is complete, undoubtedly their highest priority is going to be passing the 24-25 budget. I suspect that'll take a couple of council meetings. So as we look to schedule our next meeting, I wanted to consider together the appropriateness of a thoughtful letter to the council. If there's committee consensus, if that's appropriate, then we are going to want to put together something perhaps with the subcommittee in advance of a meeting that we could refine and submit. If that is the direction that we go, we can discuss calendaring at the end of the meeting. And with that, I'm going to turn to, first of all, welcoming Jerry Hearn for our presence just at the right moment. Jerry Hearn in the audience, that is, and to ask for approval of minutes. There might be more oral comment. Oh, I see Dave. Thank you. Yeah. Dave, are you able to unmute yourself?
I think so. Just a quick comment about the Open Space Fund at the Town Council workshop. What I heard, and it was a long workshop, and I might have missed something, was I don't remember any intent to spend it, but I think George Savage and others pointed out that it's a long-term investment fund, and therefore they've made a proposal that perhaps it could be invested more aggressively so that the overall return rate would be higher. Now that's controversial because higher means riskier, but I guess it'd be good to check, what is actually on the table before you worry about it.
Thank you for that comment. In preparation for the meeting, I listened to the full meeting again twice and lifted the word spend it and savings and hoarding from the actual comments. So I'm happy to send that script to you if you'd like it.
That'd be great. Thanks. That's, yeah,
Sure.
that doesn't seem
Sure.
like a good idea.
I thought it was worthy of discussion amongst us, and just so that we can be clear, give the town council and the town manager our perspective. But thank you. I'll happily share that with you later. So moving on to the minutes. Are there a call for edits? Okay. Move to pass the minutes of March 7th.
Move for approval.
I second.
Thank you, Nona. So move, call for a vote.
Aye.
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 And it passes. I am going to turn the meeting over to Nona for our first agenda item, but before I do that, I just wanted to acknowledge that there was a very nice collaboration of some members of this committee with the Conservation Committee, and in particular, Nona and Bev have been out at Springdown for 2 different big weeding days. There are great mountains of ox tongue, bristly ox tongue and curly dock out there, composting as we speak, thanks to their endeavors. And I know from Bev, because we've had conversations about how she enjoys very much her weeding, and I hear that she gave her all to it this last time. So thank you very much to you both. And now over to Nona for pièce de résistance.
Okay, so the goal for this part of the meeting is to have an informal study session about the conservation value of Ford Open Space and Dorothy Ford Park. And I want to emphasize that there's no agenda here. It really is, what is the conservation value of the property? What does it mean to us? What should it mean to us? What do we know? What should we know? What questions should we be asking? I've taken kind of a deep dive into this, but I know that Gary has been working on a vision statement for Ford Open Space as well as other open space parcels. And I know Carter knows all the history of the parcel. So I'm hoping that we'll all sort of chime in, and Bev has strong feelings about it too. So I'm hoping everyone will chime in. I have some slides to share that I hope will help frame the discussion. But again, it's open for everyone to jump in. And so what I'm going to do is share some slides. Let's see if this works. You checked it out and it should be working. Let's see if this is okay. So everyone should be able to see my screen. And what this is an aerial view of Dorothy Ford Park and Ford Field with parcel boundaries for the town shown in white and in yellow for Dorothy Ford Park and Ford Field. I should say at the outset that sometimes I switch back and forth between saying Dorothy Ford Park and open space, and then there's Ford Field. To me, it's one parcel, and it is divided. I don't actually know the real dividing line between the 2 sub parcels, but so I haven't shown it on this. But this is basically just to orient us that this is the 7.55 acres of the parcel. And many of us are really attached to this parcel and know the conservation value to some extent, either from walking Alpine Trail or from walking the Dwight Crowder path, both of which give you a really good glimpse of the majestic Valley Oaks and some of the conservation features. But one of the things you don't really see when you walk those trails very clearly, or especially if you're just driving by, is what the real terrain looks like. And I think the argument I want to make in this, if I want to make any kind of an argument, is that what's really special about this parcel is Los Trancos Creek. That Los Trancos Creek creates the habitat for a number of different species. And even though we don't see it every day there, it really is what defines this parcel. So let me move on to my next slide here. It should work. Hold on. It was working earlier. Okay, there we go. So this is a hillshade layer. It's the same view as in the previous slide, but it shows shaded relief topography of the same area. And what it really shows, I think, very clearly, and what I've outlined in the next slide, is where the creek actually is. Let's see if this will advance. Okay, there we go. And the important thing, I think, is that, you know, we think of parcels as being these really fixed entities, but this parcel is really defined by a very sinuous, meandering eastern boundary, which is Los Trancos Creek. And it flows from south to north through this parcel. And it's also throughout its length, Los Trancos Creek is the boundary between San Mateo County and Santa Clara County. In this next image, which is kind of busy, and so maybe if I can enlarge some things, the central point of this slide is that on the left, it shows the watershed for San Francisco Creek, a sub-watershed of which is the Los Trancos watershed. And that's what's shown down here. Let's see if I can zoom this in. Go. Oops. Hopefully everyone can see. So the star on this is where Ford Open Space is. Let me see if I can move this a little bit. Okay. And the sub watershed that's defined by Los Trancos Creek is about 7.5 square miles. So here we are down the lower reaches at Ford Open Space of the sub watershed, but the upper reaches, the headwaters, are protected by a lot of Santa Clara County and a lot of protected units within that. Let's see if I can zoom out. Oops. Back up here. It's not quite as simple as it might seem. Sorry. Let me see if I can back up. I'm going to stop sharing for just a sec, see if I can relaunch this. Maybe if someone else has a comment to make.
While you're looking for that, let me read you something that came one of my files on this subject that I didn't know until recently, that Caribou and Kelly owned the property initially, and they sold it to the town. So they had a project that they proposed for what was the exact property we're talking about. What they were wanting to do was that, at least part of that 7 acres, to build a restaurant, motel, doctor's offices, a nursery, county library, Woodside Fire District Station, all on that site.
Ambitious.
And they dropped their application because of, quote, very strong local opposition. And that came from, there was a Portola Valley Association at that time, I remember, but also Westridge people and Ladera. I wish that same kind of opposition was available now.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was the history that could have been there some time ago.
Okay, I'm going to try sharing again. Okay, so now I'm not going to try and zoom in so much anymore. That didn't work so well. But what the image on the right shows, and I'll get to more of some of what Gary was bringing up, is that Los Trancos Creek is really special in that it is the boundary between San Mateo County and Santa Clara County. And this image on the right where another star shows where Ford Open Space is located shows the jurisdictional entities in that subwatershed. So the subwatershed that is Los Trancos is down here. I'm outlining it with my hand here. And you can see that there's, you know, Foothills Park, there's Los Trancos Open Space Preserve, and other protected areas. And the creek that we have running through this part of Portola Valley then benefits from all of the protection that is afforded in the headwaters of the creek. Okay, so let me make this work. Okay, here we go. In addition to the headwaters being protected, there's also protection of the creek as you move closer to Ford Open Space. And what this image shows on the right is a map of Stanford University lands that are in unincorporated Santa Clara County. And the area that is circled and enlarged shows the area that has Ford Open Space. Again, the star, and it shows where it's located. And the significant thing about this slide is that in the region of the watershed that is closest to Ford Field, there's an additional layer of protection thanks to Stanford University, which has designated the area within 150 feet of the creek as a special conservation area, and then the adjoining areas as open space. And so they have committed to not putting any buildings within 150 feet of the creek there. So that's the light green is the open space, and the dark green areas are the special conservation area. So what are some of the things, some of the species that are actually special about this parcel? One is steelhead trout, and this is a really significant one because it's not just that the steelhead migrate downstream from the headwaters, they also have to migrate upstream. And so they have to go through the section of the creek that adjoins Ford Open Space. And there are abundant references, I've listed some of them here, that steelhead trout are present in the creek, sometimes very abundantly. What else is there? Here's some pictures of wood rat nests that I took just this week walking Alpine Trail in Ford Open Space. Dusky-footed wood rats are a special a species of conservation concern, and clearly they are present. I took these photos looking towards the creek from Alpine Trail, and probably many of you have seen them as well. Again, looking at some data from Stanford, another species that was found historically in this area was California red-legged frog. The enlargement to the left shows a very recognizable area where you see part of the wedge, and you also see other Stanford lands, you see Felt Lake. And at the bottom there's a green circle that shows a historical record for California red-legged frogs, another really important species. And I should also note that some special plants have been found very near that green button in the past, including Western leatherwood. There are other species, of course, that are important to all of these parcels. Bald eagles, for example, have nested near Felt Lake since 2016. often successfully. One thing that you'll notice in this image is that there's an area that the Stanford lands, which are in this image are shaded dark, go to not to the creek, but to a line near the creek in some cases. And the historical reason for that is shown in the next slide. Even though the creek is the boundary between San Mateo County and Santa Clara County, Stanford's lands don't go all the way to the creek in one area. And that's illustrated here. And this is, again, a somewhat complicated slide, but it makes a very simple point, which is historically in the 1800s, there was a place, and it's shown in the middle panel. I'll point to it right here. So this is an image on the left here of the tract that Stanford bought in, I think it was 1887 or so, from the previous owners. And it's the parcel that includes the wedge here, but also a lot of the open space land that Stanford has now. And the road that is now Alpine Road used to be called the Menlo Park Santa Cruz Turnpike, and that's this line right here. And in one section, that road actually crossed Los Trancos Creek and then crossed back. That's what's shown in this enlargement here. So you can see the road is crossing here and then coming back. And this particular image here is the same as the one to the right that you've seen before. As a consequence, when Stanford acquired that parcel, the Stanford property came only to this white line that you see over here, not all the way to the creek. And so that even though Stanford's buffer zone applies to the creek throughout most of the reach above Ford open space, all of the land immediately to the east of Ford open space is actually a privately held unit of about 4 acres. And that gets to, I think, the history that Carter has talked about in the past, and Gary as well, that was sort of an orphaned parcel in a sense, I guess you could say. One thing that's really interesting about that, however, is that that parcel, that the town of Portola Valley actually has a conservation easement on the east bank of Los Trancos Creek for that parcel. And that was part of the decision that was made when the parcel was transferred. It's just another indication, I think, of how much the town recognized the conservation value of the creek and wanted to protect it.
There's also a conservation, preservation for the property owner on the other side against the town part,
Recent property owner.
the current property. The
The-
current
the-
property. I mean,
That's
One
the
across
back.
the grid.
there was 11 acres. And after the incident that Gary's talking about, where they wanted to make commercial, Herbert and Kelly came back and we're going to subdivide that 7 acres into 7 parcels. And at that point, the town had incorporated. And the town didn't want to approve the subdivision, but didn't have an alternative to not approve it except to buy the property. And so they entered into an agreement in 1969 that was finally executed in 1970. To purchase the property on the San Mateo County side of the creek, generally described as about 7 acres. It was not described by the yellow line on the map. Although all of the maps use that yellow line, but it's actually described as the center line of the creek. which, does have a geologic, and hydrologic meandering. The orphan property, continued to be, because it continued to be, Herbert and Kelly's, until more recently, after the bridge that we put my office to be, to gain access to that. This Stanford would not allow access, from the other side. Even with the history, of the Mayfield, Santa Cruz, Turnpike.
Yeah.
In our pocket. It didn't end up being with that. Because that road still exists and still is, still has remnants, of remnants of.
The Mayfield Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
And that, and I'm sorry, which part is that? How does that relate to the map?
You go,
Which
I don't
piece
know
is
if this
that?
will back up. Let's see if it, okay, there. we
Is that-
go.
Is it
so
the one that
the black line.
Yeah, so-
Was the, in the
Oh, that was it,
that was the, Menlo Park, Santa Cruz Turnpike.
right.
And that was the define the difference between the property that Stanford purchased and what was actually, McDonald Ranch.
Right.
And McDonald Ranch, actually had a panhandle that came down, that, was purchased when Herbert and Kelly took over the Madera subdivision after it failed in the fifties.
Thank you. Carter, can I suggest you put your microphone a little closer to you and see if it
Yeah.
cuts down that reverb that we're getting? If not, we were told that sometimes we have to turn our mics off when we're not speaking. That's. Okay, thank you.
Is yours turned on?
I,
Oh,
oh, so it
Oh.
cured it.
okay.
Mona, do you
Yeah, I just have a couple more things to add, maybe. Let's see if this will work. Okay, so in terms of special status species, I mean, one of the advantages of that parcel having been bought is that there is a proposal now to develop it. And so there's an environmental information form that has been produced about the conservation value of the parcel. And here's some things that it mentions. So it just reinforces what we already know, but it makes it clear that everyone else knows it too, I suppose. So, and then I'd like to just close with one last slide, partly because I think everyone has really thought about the majestic valley oaks that are located in toward open space and how old they might be. I think it's really interesting. I mean, I sort of did a deep dive into thinking about what this landscape looked like 100 years ago or so. And there is a 1930s image that's shown here on the left with the same frame as the current image, again showing what looks like the parcel boundaries. And you can see that those valley oaks looked about the same 100 years ago as they do now. It's, one's left with the conclusion that this whole area, which is basically alluvium, and it's a valley bottom. This is where valley oaks really do thrive and can live for hundreds of years, and probably still have a fair amount of life left in them. I know people are very attached to those trees, but they are part of the vegetation and the habitat that supports all of these special status species. So Gary, could you kind of chime in with some of the thoughts that you have about the conservation value?
Here's, yeah, and then. could
Never
you
gonna
put-
remember that.
Gary, would you put your speaker a little closer? Because I think.
It was off.
Oh, that too.
Yeah, okay, there we go. So I'm going to read something from the title report. Nona, do you know all about, have you read that title report, the description? Well, see if you know about this. Maybe you already do.
This is the Hare Brewing Kelly report or the town report?
A title report. Tell us what a title report, who creates it? Yeah.
The title report is, is produced by the title company to describe, how the property is held, the description of it, including the meets and bounds. And it's generally a document prepared and utilized in the purchase and sale of properties.
Okay, thanks. So the report provides that the roughly 7-acre parcel has granted easements for drainage purposes across the property. I guess there are some, I don't know of any, across the property. A private egress road, of course you know about that, and a conservation easement. The conservation easement runs contiguous to and easterly from the center of Los Trancos Creek over a strip of land 25 feet in width, extending from the northern to the southern property boundaries. Easterly, that's our side, isn't it? So there's another easement, 25 feet from the center line.
Gary, that's the easement, the conservation easement that I talked about. The property on the other side has against this one. And the town has a conservation easement equal to this on the other
The
side.
other side.
On the eastern side's the other county, right?
The eastern is the other county, and it goes, as you say, from the center line of the creek, 25 feet to the east.
Is that
It's
definitional?
described as going to the east from the center of the creek.
I always thought the road was east-west. You're telling me it's north-south. huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we've already talked about the 25 feet. But that, it affects our side. It's an easement that Stanford holds.
The property owner on the other side, who owns the 4 acres on the other side,
Oh.
has an easement on the conservation easement on the town's properties, two easements. One is the driveway, access.
Right.
The other is an easement, basically equivalent to the easement that the town has. So that, the town has an easement on the eastern side and the neighbor has an easement on the western side.
Okay. So if the conditions are the same on both sides, conservation easement is for purposes of protecting vegetation, terrain, natural waters, drainage, and wildlife. No vegetation removal other than poison oak is allowed. And of course, no removal of trees over 12 feet in circumference. And so no grading in excess of 5 cubic yards, no dumping of refuse, no fences, no buildings, and so on within that easement. Do we know what the effect of that easement on us is on our side? It's 25 feet on our side.
I'm not sure there is much because the town has since instituted creek setbacks. And the creek setbacks, for this acreage, would be much larger than that conservation easement would be.
And that's not shown on your, the yellow line is it's more or less
It's-
the creek center, isn't it?
The yellow line is what the county considers the parcel boundary, but the property boundary is actually the creek, as I understand it.
Yeah.
And so that's a, I don't know what you call it. It's a technicality in a sense, because effectively each side owns to the center of the creek.
Yeah.
I didn't show any setbacks. I didn't show any easements on
Yeah.
this.
Oh,
Because
okay.
this is, we decided that the focus of this should be conservation value, landscape kind of questions. mainly, what is it we really want to know that we don't know already, and what should we care about?
And towards that, I would like to take, I acknowledge, David's had his hand, up for a bit. But first I thought I would take committee questions and also acknowledge that we have another expert here in Jerry Hearn that has studied the entire creek shed, on behalf of Stanford and other, entities. So would like to engage him in this conversation as well, when you're ready, Jerry. So any other committee questions clarifying or of interest, before we turn to Jerry and David?
No, I don't. But the reason I brought all of this up is to make sure that we know where the boundaries that cannot be touched are.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, no, it's.
and do we know? Can we draw a line with our easements that we have in force? Do we,
Nona, if you could bring up your presentation and show the LiDAR. You know, again, because that more accurately shows where the creek actually is.
And while Nana's doing that, to complement, can you, as the creek moves, as creeks, sinuous creeks do, the county line moves with it, right? Yeah. So I think you all have a printout of this. You can-
Gary, the blue line, more accurately represents, where the creek is. And you can see that in places, the creek goes a long ways, onto, the neighboring parcel. And in a few places, it comes quite a ways, into, the, Dorothy Ford Park parcel. The blue line effectively is the county boundary, and it's also the boundary of the property. But the town, in all properties, 1 acre and larger, are a 50-foot setback from the center line of the creek. The conservation easement, is 25 feet. So there isn't much difference because the setback, the creek setback, precludes fences, essentially all of the same, kinds of features that the conservation easement, is intended to prevent.
So I might just add to that, that we have looked at where the setbacks would be, but we decided for this meeting to really just focus on what's there now rather than what could potentially be changed, for example. So if the town decided to change some aspect of the setbacks or easements, that's a decision that's sort of separate from the conservation value. And so we didn't really want to get into that. But there is one thing I think might be interesting to sort of think about, is that creeks meander. And so the creek, as you see it here, is as the LiDAR revealed it 2 years ago. It's going to be different in the future, and it was different in the past. And one of the ways that you can sort of see that, I may have to stop sharing and go back to this, but is that in that image of the old felt track where it showed the road crossing the creek and then coming back, you can actually compare the sort of sinuosity of the creek 100 years ago to what it is now. It's not dramatically different, and I don't know whether or not old maps like that are really, can really be used to talk about changes in meander, but we know from things, all of the things that have happened with Los Trancos Creek in the last few years in terms of bank destabilization, that creeks meander.
If I could, through the chair, it'd be great to get Jerry's point of view on this.
Yes, would you like to go after David? Yeah. David, would you weigh in here?
Sure. First of all, I learned a lot. Thanks for the presentation. I thought I knew a lot about our history, but I learned some new things. Uh, Second, I think it's a tragedy that we're having this discussion. I mean, not about conservation value, that's fine, but the need to have that discussion because somebody might do something with it. And to be honest, I think it's because our town has either been too cheap or too chicken to do something better. And as something I've said repeatedly at town council meetings, trees don't vote. So they apparently have, are losing. Um, but you all get all that. As far as the species, I've spent a fair amount of time working with endangered species biologists and stuff. I've been a wildlife photographer a bunch. I'm a huge fan of the steelhead trout. I think those are great. Um, that's a big plus for me. The dusky-footed wood rats, I'm more familiar with kangaroo rats, which I spend a lot of time with, and or but it's one of the few places where we have a riparian habitat for the dusky-footed wood rats, and so that is really special, I think. Um, the eagles, they're going to nest at Felt Lake or not based on the fish in Felt Lake. So, and there's lots of bald eagles now. So I know they're protected, but only because of DDT. There's no shortage of bald eagles places. So I'm not too excited about that. I don't think we've had any frogs there for at least 20 years. It doesn't mean they couldn't be reintroduced, but I think they're all over in that other creek by Webb Ranch. All of them may be like, I don't know, 10 or 100 or whatever. So that would be my thought. On the white-tailed kite, it's not, the more vegetation grows, the worse the habitat. So when I want to go to photograph white-tailed kites, I go to Arrested Arrow, which has huge open meadows. So I don't, and there's plenty of them there. So I'm not sure. I don't know. I know that the people against the Stanford Wedge used the white-tailed kite also, but I don't think any of them have ever actually paid attention to where those kites are. We had some in our yard till the ravens chased them away, but I don't know. So that's just kind of random comments I thought might be interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Appreciate it. So any other committee questions, Wayne, before we hear a little more from Jerry? Jerry, would you like to stand at the microphone at the podium? You'll need to turn it on if it for some reason doesn't work, the one next to Terry Lee, and welcome, Terry.
I think that's why. So thank you for this opportunity. Yeah,
Sorry for interrupting.
no problem.
Will you do a small introduction?
Yes.
Just because you are so steeped in the flow of it,
Yeah, thank you
headwaters to the bay.
for this opportunity. Betsy introduced me as an expert. I'm not sure I'm an expert, but I've spent a whole lot of time in both Los Trancas Creek and the entire San Francisco Creek watershed for the last 35 years, both in it and in policy discussions and everything like that. So I'm experienced, but I'm not a hydrologist. I'm not a biologist, except I like to hang out with plants and animals, that kind of thing. But so what I'm here to do is just maybe share some random thoughts. And actually, Nona said almost everything that I had already thought about. I really appreciate your presentation. And I love the maps, by the way, and particularly the LiDAR map. That, when you're involved in creek stuff, actually seeing the channel outlined like that, showing its sinuosity, and over the years where you see it change. And I know personally many places in San Francisco Creek watershed that have changed, that I know that I used to walk here and I don't walk there anymore. So it's more dynamic than most people think. It moves a lot of sediment. As a matter of fact, the entire watershed has been classified as impaired for sediment, which puts an added strain on any kind of development that you want to do there, because you have to really be very careful about the sediment loads. Some other things that came to mind, and I'm happy to answer any questions or engage in conversation, which is probably better for me anyway, is that Stanford, I believe on besides it being an area of special conservation, which is in the community plan, I believe it's part of the HCP, the Habitat Conservation Plan that they have on the Dish and San Francisco Creek. I think those are tied together. So that means that it's a very special planning area. And Stanford did that in response to trying to figure out ways to deal with the endangered species on its land. Actually, not just the endangered species, the ones that are probably going to be coming to be endangered in the future. And so they put a lot of time and effort into protecting the conservation values of the creek and their other lands. As an example of something that they did that actually, quite honestly, was kind of surprising to me, is down opposite Webb Ranch, which now this is just before the junction with San Francisco Creek. Stanford actually gave the county permission and gave for them to actually move the creek back farther onto Stanford's property rather than to put what they call soldier walls, just very abrupt flood walls so that they could have a much more natural landscape. In other words, to let the creek do what it wanted to do. And if you go there and you walk across, it's right across Alpine Road, and you look at it, you can hardly see what's happened there because of the vegetation that's been provided there. This is wonderful stuff for us who care about watersheds and care about the species that inhabit them, including humans, right? Because quite honestly, open space and watersheds and creeks and things are better for humans too. So a couple of other comments I might say about oak trees, which is another kind of passion of mine. I read somewhere that the valley, it's either the valley oak or the coast live oak, is an important factor in something like 260 odd species that we often don't think of. We think of species as endangered species like steelhead trout or, the rhinos in Africa or something like that. But there's this entire ecosystem of insects that is absolutely incredibly important to us. Without them, we're not here. The human beings are not here. And those types of things are things that go on at a very small level in riparian areas in particular, places with water, right? And those are the things that I am becoming much more interested in rather than just the steelhead trout, or the red-legged frog. Is I want to see, and I've noticed in some places, like my own backyard, I live in actually Los Trancas Woods, but right across the fence from Portola Valley, that there are fewer of all kinds of insects there. And I've noticed it. And if I've noticed it and I'm not studying it, it's, that means it's really changing a lot. And that worries me because bird species have changed too in our backyard. And riparian habitats very important for all types of birds, whether they're migratory or whether they're resident birds. So those are some things to think about, added on to everything that Nona was saying. And the last thing to remember is about I work a lot as a public member, and not an official member, with the San Francisco Creek JPA downstream. We're working on projects to I would say to make it possible for humans and other species to live together within the watershed without tramping on each other too much. That's the way I like to think about it. Downstream, the JPA has completed a huge project from the Bay to 101 for flooding purposes, but added in a lot of that. They added in a lot of area of marshland. And they did it at extra cost. They didn't have to do it. They did it in extra because it was the right thing to do. We're working now on an area upstream for there, and we're working to do the same thing. It isn't just about flood protection. It's about creating good habitat, right? And it's much easier to preserve habitat than it is to recreate it. And quite honestly, if I can just say one more thing, once you once you mess with an area, and I don't care who you are, I've messed with areas that I kind of regret sometimes. It takes a long time to come back, if it ever comes back to that level. So
But
I'm happy
something-
for
something
questions.
You just said, Jerry, tied in with the Nona's third slide, I thought it was fascinating, the alluvial fan throughout Menlo Park in Palo Alto.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about the earlier years, I mean, tens and hundreds of years ago in this creek, and how much the alluvial soil, and was it a floodplain? I mean, that alluvial soil indicates that there's some kind of overflow. I don't know that it's all bottom up fed. Do we know very much about that? Because the way that you can have creeks overflowing their banks is a positive as it slows water down and doesn't create fast-moving currents and flooding downstream. So that is a long-winded way of looking at what has been there, what purpose has that land served, and what's the interest of Menlo Park and other communities downstream of us in what we do here.
Don't exactly know where to start to answer that. So that is a beautiful picture of the alluvial fan. And the way that I think of creeks is under certain circumstances, and this is one of them with the given climate and the given topography, they essentially paint the landscape. Where you see the edges of the alluvial fan in that thing, the creek used to run there. And it deposited its soil and then moved back across in these big painting movements, and they're layered. So if you go down, maybe 10 feet, you're going to find a different set of alluvium down there than above, because the creek has been doing. That's what the creek wants to do. Not so much up here, because this is where it's deriving its soil to plant down there. And that's the job of of streams and things like that. One of the jobs is to move water. The other is to move sediment. And if you think of things like, the Middle East, the Nile Valley and things, we wouldn't have had agriculture if that sort of thing hadn't been happening. By the way, East Palo Alto, as you may know, we used to be a very highly developed agricultural area. I remember as a kid going there and all the truck farms they had there because the soil's so wonderful, right? So that's one of the things I think. But what was your second? Oh, the interest of Menlo Park and Palo Alto. The entire JPA, which is Menlo Park, Palo Alto, East Palo Alto, and then the two counties, they're very interested in what happens here, because what happens upstream affects you downstream. There's just no doubt about it. So everything that happens up here, whatever it is of interest. Not necessarily of concern, but it definitely is interest. And a classic example, of course, that you and Nono know about is Searsville Dam. And that's, and let me tell you, I get asked so many times by people downstream, like, what's going on with
Why it was so
Searsville?
hard,
Yeah.
so hard to get to here.
Yeah.
Really?
But what some people don't realize too is that oftentimes what happens downstream affects upstream. I remember having that conversation with somebody when we were doing the Creekside ordinance. And this guy said, well, he's downstream of me. And I said, well, he could do something down there that will affect your property up here. And the guy looked at me and went, oh, I never thought. Well, yeah, I know you don't think about that, but some of us do. So
Nice,
That's an
nice.
interesting
Nona, you
thing.
had something to say.
Yeah, thank you so much for your comments, Jerry. I wanted to just respond to two things.
Sure.
I totally agree with you on valuing species beyond the special status species, but since they're the ones that are most monitored, we have the most information about them, and they're sort of indicators for all the other things that we do care about, but don't have as much information on. That's my only reason for sort of highlighting those. And the second thing I wanted to add to with your great comments about the oaks is that, that whole area, I think the entirety of that parcel is unconsolidated alluvium, which means if you look at the liquefaction risk maps, the entire thing is in a liquefaction zone of medium risk, which all I know is that means it's more risk than low risk and less risk than high risk, although the immediate border of the creek is a high risk liquefaction zone, and that the trees really play a role in keeping soil in place, whether they're on the bank of the creek or whether they're those big oaks that are holding soil in place where they are rooted, because their roots go beyond the drip line in those cases. In fact, I happened to look at a neighboring community, Los Altos Hills. It has a lesser creek setback than ours, but it extends beyond they have a 25-foot setback, but it extends beyond that to the outside drip line of all of the trees for just such a reason. So any parting words, Jerry?
So I would, oaks, I've read a lot about oaks, and you're absolutely right. We have and not only do our oaks independently useful, but they interact with each other. They actually, it turns out they actually transfer nutrients back and forth among them through mycorrhizal relationships and things like that. And you're absolutely, one of the problems that is facing us now downstream is the fact that the creek didn't behave the way we thought it would behave.
Hmm.
And people are attributing that to too much, well, it's about friction. But the question is what caused the friction? And a lot of people say, well, you got all these trees and things and willows and let's just take them out. Well, we know exactly what'll happen if you take them out. You're right, Nona. The banks would disappear. And it's surprisingly how fast they will disappear if you've also removed the top of bank vegetation, because those roots are going down a long way and are holding those banks in from a long distance. So you're absolutely right about that. And the one other thing I wanted to mention is I totally agree with the fact I'm glad we have species of concern, because otherwise, quite honestly, people would say, well, why should we worry about this? This particular strain of steelhead is an evolutionary significant unit. It's the North Coast steelhead, I think. And when I was on the Fish and Wildlife Advisory Committee, we actually funded a study with a person from the fish biologist who did fin clips and found that these are not only just species that's of concern, but a particular unit of species that are of very concerned. So they're even a little more important than just your normal steelhead, which in many places are endangered. And the other thing is red-legged frogs, I don't know a whole lot about them, but one thing I know about them is they can move a long distance and they can pop up in places where they used to be 20 years ago, and they can migrate from a long distance away to get there. So because they haven't been there for a while, doesn't mean that they won't be back. And if we take away habitat, of course, they won't be back.
Well, that would be a hopeful sign.
Yeah. Okay.
Could celebrate
If you
that.
have any more questions or comments, I'd be happy
Well, we're going
talk.
we'll have this conversation will be continued at a future meeting. And we would welcome you back then, Jerry, or anytime in between. Yeah, really great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Committee, if there are any other questions on this, I'm sure Nona would happily take them. And yet it's 6 o'clock and we have 2 more agenda items. We're not going to spend very much time on either one, but enough to settle questions that you might have there. So anything else around the table? All right. Nona, thank you so much. Your maps are stupendous. They make you famous. All right, then we'll move on to the next item on the calendar, which is the open space properties and underutilized and inaccessible parcels in town. This is going to be a bit of a different presentation than the one that Nona and I began originally. And all of you long-serving members on the committee will recall those what 12 to 15, 16 meetings with Chip leading the charge alongside Jeremy to try to find a means of letting these go to other owners so they could get them off the town books. Since that time though, and apropos of something else entirely, I thought I was about, someone came to our attention who was quite interested in, and a neighbor of one of these parcels. And it looked like we had a perfectly teed up situation to bring the town some income. And the town manager, in fact, is in one of his slides at last week's meeting, had pointed to the prospect of land sales in town. So it was really feeding into a town priority, which is to bring in more income, as well as releasing, what could conceivably have some amount of risk to the town, these many underutilized parcels. So given that we could bring together two parties with similar interests, it was all speed go ahead. The interested person did some actual research for us on the deeds. We got it all teed up. And a few days before the meeting, I recollected hearing about the Surplus Land Act apropos of something else entirely different from this, and thought, gosh, I should probably read that in case there's any bearing. So the full entire Surplus Land Act is here. It's 35 pages long. I did not make copies of it, but I'm going to send down a crib sheet, which I have yellow highlighted in actually, I'll need one of those back. Thank you. I'm sorry, I just gave this away. I want to draw your attention to some fairly significant impediments. At the bottom, so first of all, these are lifted straight out of their excerpts from the land Surplus Land Act itself. The Surplus Land Act has a lot to say about what all towns can do and not do. Do and not do with their land, because they look at all land as prospective housing sites. As all laws are not written perfectly with everyone in mind, although they apply to all people equally and all communities equally, you can tell that the people that wrote this were more industrialized cities, larger metropolitan areas, because the loan exceptions to getting out your land, allowing a community, allowing a municipality to sell a piece of land, the loan exceptions are for 5,000 acre parcels. So 5,000 acres, thank you very much, Carter. 5,000 square foot parcels. In some cases, a 10,000 square foot parcel if you qualify in a different, more narrow way. None of our parcels, I didn't do a slavish look at all of them. I did an eyeball of all of them. And so perhaps there's one in here that qualifies, but I, at this moment in time, don't believe it does. And certainly it does, the party that was interested in town in coming to the table to work out a price was not, did not qualify because those parcels were larger than. And in a town like Portola Valley, a rural town where land is cheap, and particularly if it's steep hillside in severe high fire severity zone districts and inaccessible, it tends to be somewhat larger than 5,000 square feet anyway. So I am happy to take questions or to call out these exceptions, but following on my read of the entirety of this and pulling out those examples, I became deflated enough. I saw our town attorney at the meeting last week, and as there was a break, was able to have a very informal conversation with her. And at the moment that she responded, this being Catherine, our town attorney, she thought the same. In fact, the town manager had previously been using a phrase for other things. And his phrasing is, the juice is not worth the squeeze. And she said the same of these properties. She referenced that and said, I think that might apply to these properties. Even if we did have a 5 or a 10,000 square foot parcel and we wanted to liberate it, the means by which we need to jump through many hoops with HCD to have it approved for sale. So the cost of qualifying in staff time and attorney time would make it a losing proposition, at least as of this reading and writing and as far as the Land Act, Surplus Land Act is today. So a little disappointing. Any committee questions before I call on David Cardinal, who has a question? David,
Let's have David while we try to, assemble.
thank
our
you for
questions.
being a
Oh, sure. First, that's another kind of sad thing. Second, my only point is, I think we sold the 2 lots back to Blue Oaks. We sold them somehow that we were given for affordable housing. Maybe that was different, but maybe that's worth having attorney research to see how we did that.
Yeah, I think, David, I should have mentioned at the outset, but thank you for bringing that up. This passed in and became effective more recently. So it's dated April 2021.
Okay, fair enough. So then it just seems stupid, but I'll leave it at that.
You know, the first stupid law I've ever read. Anyone else?
It would seem, Betsy, that, that this law, is, defined as surplus land, according to, according to HCD. And it's intended to liberate land, for housing. I don't think, I think the liberation of other kinds of land would still be allowed, but it's not part of, the HCD relationship.
For towns, if I understand you, I may not understand you exactly. I will give you a general response and you can dial in. The whole purpose of this act, as you're mentioning, is to identify all possible land for as future potential housing or to go in partnership with a developer, all of it. And so this surplus is defined as anything the town owns. They are required, as you will see, of yellow highlighted on the first page and second page, aspects of the requirements to record every single parcel that the town owns, to keep a list of it, to update it annually on April 1st and get that information into HCD so that they track you and these parcels. If not useful to housing this year, they see it as useful in the future years. So it's unfortunate the town has its hands tied, as I have read it. Did that answer your question?
Only kind
Okay, well, you can go at it again.
I'm just, to me, well, I guess maybe I'm getting confused about, the mission of the open space acquisition. Because it would seem to me that, the reason for the tax, that we pay with our utility, is, to provide funding, for the opportunity to acquire, for open space. And if we're liberating land for some other purpose, that money should not be used to fund, the general fund or anything else. It should go to, the acquisition fund. And, that acquisition fund, at some point, there's going to be, a, a high value piece of land that comes up.
either as, as part of one of the larger parcels or contiguous to something, that, that the town should have those monies available. And you know, I'm trying to figure out what our job is.
So you're saying, I
Now,
hear you.
I mean,
hear
I
you.
was on the committee, that actually looked at, actually created this list in the first place.
And you're
it
wondering
was
why
a-
it's surfacing here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the issue that brought this up in the first place, was to create an inventory of potential, housing sites. And we effectively, didn't find much, because of literal topographic, constraints, utility constraints because, of access to public sewer was, limited or non-existent, unstable geology. I mean, the majority of the reason that there's two major reasons that the town owns it. One is by default, because they're kind of in between some leftover bits. Others are because of access issues or geologic instability. Or because they were acquired on purpose, for a specific town purpose, like the school site. But actually this site, the town got by default because the school district, decided because of the Alquist Creola impact, that the seismicity of this site meant that it can no longer be utilized as a school. So, but the Ford Field site, was, specifically purchased to be open space. And I'm completely and totally befuddled, that HCD has any way of, grabbing hold of that. If that land were owned by the Peninsula Open Space Trust and had been transferred, to the Peninsula Regional Open Space District, with deed restrictions, it would have been off the table. So, because, all of the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space properties are exempt, from being considered by
So,
HCD. So I'm trying to figure out what this committee is trying to do, either about selling land or making it available for housing, or somehow converting it, to permanent open space so that it will never be used by.
we are too. We are too. I think
So,
we're all
I mean,
interested in that.
the alternate, is to recommend that all of this get transferred to somebody who never can by mission, utilize it for
And-
anything.
And I think,
And, I mean, anyway, I'm feeling a level of frustration, that, we're being whipsawed, whipsawn, around by another public agency that wants to create housing on every little bit and piece.
Mhm, mhm.
And I'd give it all to them.
Look, right, they
I
can
mean,
have, they can have these.
You go figure out how you're gonna put housing on, on these, these areas of unstable geology.
Yeah.
Here,
yeah.
give them to the state.
You might be on to something, Carter.
Let me say something about the history. I think, Terry, you remember this. That Chip was also talking to homeowners up in the hills who had a large, maybe their property was in two pieces and they had this extra piece. And Chip was talking to them about creating a conservation easement on that land to reduce the costs of property taxes and that sort of thing. So I'm kind of wondering if that's how we circled back to this thing. But it was really a distinctly different situation.
Well, it wasn't so
talking to
long
property
ago that
owners
we
with a
talked
lot of
about it.
land,
Right.
and you save the land, don't build a house there, that sort of thing.
I think
Hmm.
the 15, 16 meetings that I counted, because it was recorded in the minutes, at least the front page of the minutes that are still available. The last one was, as I recall, January, February of 2020 was the last conversation, at which time it just went dead. The conversation went dead. So it hasn't been that long, and there was such a robust committee investment in moving this forward that when this opportunity arose, and because they're underutilized, it was like, wow, free money. In my naivete. So anyway, it did lead to a kind of a surprising, I'm always entertained by what happens up in Sacramento. Vent your frustration, Carter, and share it sometimes. Yeah. There is. There is. You're right.
It hasn't been taken care of, for as long as I've lived in,
Which is
not long.
when,
I'm a new.
Yeah, old timer, come on.
we might want to send a memo at some point to the town manager, and I actually think we might have stumbled on a brilliant idea over there, which is like to say, okay, if we can't sell them, it's yours. You give it to the state and have it be their liability. Anyway, we may have reached a dead end for at least today.
I kind of think so. I think, yeah.
Off base, I'm a newcomer to the committee and for the town.
Well, it just looks like on this, there's not much here on this list that we could turn into open space anyway.
So,
There's some potential for maybe some exchanging, of some property, for some buildable rights on some adjacent property. I was thinking up in the Hayfield or something like that,
yeah,
because there's some stable ground up there that currently, as part of their planning and development, that is set aside as I think they call it farm. And whether that would be an opportunity, to create some, one of these more dispersed housing, kind of, area. I don't know. That's the only one I can think of.
well, our ears are perking up.
Hmm.
And in a future meeting, not terribly long from now, we will reconvene on sites and brainstorming for the topic one of the post-adoption plan, which is identifying sites. So we'll be heading in that direction.
It just
Be
seems weird
summer,
that
fall
we're
timeframe.
talking about rights to build on, and the whole purpose of this body is to acquire sites for open space. So I feel conflicted.
So let me ask you, you were on the committee that was looking for housing sites. Yeah. And you didn't come up with any.
We came up with, the town center as a potential. We came up with the road remnant, across the road from Anna Breen's house. That backs up to, that's not the frog pond. It's that
Road
area, but
remnant.
it's not, the frog pond property already is for you. And but the frog pond is not what that property is. There isn't a parcel there. Yeah, it's, the road right of way, in the fifties was gobbled up by the county, to create a highway that was gonna go to Pescadero. And that was the end of of a widening of, Alpine Road. And there's a big wide spot, it's about an acre. But that was the only other one, and then there was an uproar, and it was described as the Frog Pond property, but Frog Pond property is the 6 acres, where the meadow and the Frog Pond really
Yeah.
is,
Right. Yeah.
not.
Okay.
Sometimes there can be a parcel line, but spiritually it feels like Frog Pond, but I understand the parcel line.
So-
It was technically not.
So Betsy, have we, unless someone wants to spend some time going after this in great detail, I don't know who that would be. Maybe
I-
we've beat this one to death for now.
Sadly, I think it may be, that it's tabled and, we'll rely on our council liaison to, take our discussion to the town manager. Including with the idea of invite the state to come down here and take the liability off our hands at the same time. So then moving along to the Hawthorne's area meeting report. I'm going to make this a fairly brief report, but I included in your handouts today the option 8 and option 9 plans that were discussed at the meeting. There was an on-site meeting. I'm going to have to do this by memory, March 23rd, I think it was. It was a Sunday, late Sunday in March, pouring down rain. We all got good and wet. Tromped around up there for several hours. First focusing on the trail, and then we came down to look at the most recent options for ingress, egress, and parking. And I want you to know that there was option 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, and 7 before we got to options 8 and 9. So you can read between the lines that things are kind of bumping along. And I imagine that the next and last meeting on June the 13th, Thursday at 6 p.m. if you're interested, we'll probably have option 10, but it's just a wild guess. In any case, it's been something of a trial, I would say, because there really aren't any good sites. That's why we're right on up there. I said to myself at one point, it's a
I
good
would-
thing they didn't.
I would tend to disagree. I think there's some incredible sites, but they're off of Strength Road.
I wholly hear you.
Because the ground is already flat, the roads are already in. The old racetrack, is flat ground, that doesn't need grading. I really think that we need to encourage the protection. These parking areas off of Alpine Road, are in the scenic court.
Plus they involve, all of them, and these two in particular involve a significant amount of cut and fill, so it would violate Muni code with.
Well, and I don't
stipulations.
think the numbers, just the number of parking spaces justify, the issue.
Mhm.
And, they could end up with essentially a lot of parking
Mhm.
in an area that requires no grading at all. And there's something else going on, with the open space district about why they want to do this.
And
And
Carter,
instead of utilizing the areas, where the ground is already flat.
right, right, there is.
Well, we were told at the beginning that they were concentrating on this area because they'd already studied it and it was ready to go. And that area with the historic buildings.
Called the
haven't been
historic
studied
complex.
Yet. So it was not on the table yet.
Right.
That's what we were told.
They
was
took
not- they
13
were-
acres and
Wanted to go with this.
they took, of the 79 total acres, they took the 13 acres that I was talking about, the historic complex, off the table. And won't allow any conversation. I mean, they'll allow conversation, but they really are tabling any ideas that come out of that. They are preserving that for a completely separate and independent process.
Because it took a long time to get to this point with this area. And it's going to take another, they said, another long time to get that district studied.
Well, but the issue is that's already a brownfield over there, you know, because of, you know, the amount of debris and the amount- the
well,
amount, the amount of use and,
Yeah.
and the gravel roads were already there and, I mean, there's a public sewer, you know, that runs along that same alignment.
well, also the statement was that the roads are curvy and no good.
Line of sight.
Visit.
Yeah.
Site distance. That
That-
was, that was
the-
the other problem.
The
they said.
consultant has been consistent in putting down any conversation about a Los Trancos approach. He's just said it's not workable. We don't have the lines of sight.
Well, the issue that I'm concerned, because I live on Willowbrook Drive, is that, you know, the parking lot, you know, at the Windy Hill Open Space in the district, at the Windy Hill Open Space, it overflows, you know, by about 8:30 on Saturdays and Sundays. And during COVID, it was overflowing every day. And that overflow ends up, you know, out on the public streets and fills, you know, Willowbrook Drive and fills both sides, you know, of Portola Road. And I really think that there needs to be a more holistic, you know, re-review of the Midwest Peninsula Regional Open Space District, you know, conditional use permit. So, you know, because the overflow onto the streets is, to me, usurping, you know, some of the, you know, the enjoyment that we have, you know, of our own community.
I hear
And
you.
it's a-
I
it-
hear
it-
you. And
it's-
I,
On Willowbrook, it's an incredible nuisance.
yeah, no, I know. I live close by myself and I know Gary has been studying this for how long now, Gary?
But there really isn't any comparison beside Windy Hill and the Hawthorns.
I think Gary
In
Nielsen
term-
had long hair when he started studying the problems on Portola Road.
Very what you gonna say?
He's always had hair like me. He was born bald and stayed that way, just like me. Stick together.
I think one thing that I find really frustrating about all of these conversations is I feel like Portola Valley serves the region so much in terms of open space that we can't serve it in every possible respect. We can't provide housing and open space and everything else that people need. And it just frustrates me intensely that we do provide open space. I mean, through Midpen and through other venues. It's so true.
Agreed. Now, in terms of just wrapping up on Hawthorne's for today, the June 13th meeting, which is coming up, is supposed to be the last meeting for the POG, the Public Area Working Group, after which they'll prepare a formal report and hand it off to the PNR, the Planning and Natural Resources Committee, which is a group of 3 of the Board of Directors. So 3 out of the total Board of Directors is the PNR, and from there, it will come back to the Town Council. My sense is, as a committee, that we might have enough on our plate right now and can afford to wait. We can work as a committee with our Town Council, let our Town Council know the collective thought. So in other words, over this summer, we would be preparing a recommendation from open space to the Town Council and get that in so that they're apprised of it. Apart from that, if we want to weigh in as a committee, we could take that up at so I wanted to talk about calendaring the next meeting and timing. The proximate issue is the budget, and how we want to, if we want to, and if we do, how we want to respond to the proposal on the table. And I'm happy to send not just David Cardinal, but I can send all of you the notes and timing correlation, as well as the link to the town council meeting of April 24th, where these remarks were made that caused me to bring it to your attention in oral communications. In any case, would we like to take that up at a future meeting? And if so,
Yes.
is there, good, okay. Anyone dissent? Would there be people here that would like to volunteer to work on that subcommittee?
So I have a question whether we need a subcommittee.
Well, the
I
reason
mean,
why,
I think we have this answer.
I'll be a short letter.
And we can say this too. We can say no more emphatically. I mean, that's the reason that we voted for the tax, was that it was going to open space. Yeah, and the reason it was a restricted fund is so that it couldn't be pilfered, to deal with, with issues like this.
And I would, so I could get right into this. My sense is that, according to the Brown Act, we can't really talk about this issue substantively today because
Turn the
it's not on our
microphones off.
agenda. So that's why I went to the trouble to mention it in oral communications. But you've been so succinct, Carter, you got right by. So, Nate. Okay. Judith?
So what would be helpful, speaking from a future council hearing this, is to have some reflection of your views on that possibility. It can be really short.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be, like, I think everyone's gonna get the perspective, but to have a statement from you, I think would be helpful, whatever it is.
And
So it doesn't have to be long, and you can have someone, like, I don't know what your next meeting plans are, but you might want to consider having someone rough out some perspective and then discuss it as a committee, or you have a subcommittee draft it. I don't think you need to make it too complicated. I mean, maybe few more words than Carter's. Just a couple, but
just
so
to soften it up,
that's
Carter.
suggested one. And the only other comment, since I'm here and I don't want to take up your time, is on the Hawthorns. My understanding is it's coming to the town council for comment. So it would be helpful for you to weigh in on your perspective so that we can go into that meeting and be prepared with your perspective,
And
whatever it is. And I think you've made submissions before, even if you just recycle those. But
Right.
whenever it comes up, we're not a deciding body. We are going to be commenting, is my understanding.
Wait a minute, Judith.
I thought you
The
were-
open space district operates under a conditional use permit.
Correct.
And,
I-
and it's, I mean, it's adding a new property. Yeah, and that property should be, considered under either a new use permit, or an update to
That-
the current use permit.
Right. My understanding is that can also happen. You should check with Catherine and everyone, but the Hawthorne's process, I don't think they had us even being able to comment on it. And that was added later in the process. But my understanding is we are commenting before they make a recommendation to their approval board. That's this piece of it. I don't know where it goes later, and I'm sure there is going to be future.
My sense was that was a
opportunity.
strategic addition. because it was going to then go to their, from PNR to their board to you. And that's further down the track, and for space saving or whatever, it was intelligent to incorporate some input earlier in the process. But I do think that you're a deciding body on this,
'Cause
as Carter does because of the
I
conditional
was
use.
on the ASNC,
Mhm.
when the parking lot came in. And that was part of, they're updating their conditional use permit, in order to build that, parking
Right,
lot.
that's not this meeting. The meeting Betsy's referencing, my understanding is to enable the town's comment to be incorporated into their recommendation, but it's not binding. I'm
Right.
not saying there's not additional, like, for example, we have a setback. We're not waiving that by this process. It's going to be noted. We have they also, if they pick one of the parking lot locations, they're saying they have to widen the street. Well, who widened the street? It's not them. So a lot of the different implementation pieces would have to come before us. But this is the stop for us to comment on what they are proposing to their board for approval. So I don't think this is one and done. I think it's step one and it's a moment to have a comment. And I would take advantage of that and remind the town council what your view is. So don't think you have to do more than keep it simple and have a view.
Thank you for the timing on that. We will probably, assuming that it doesn't happen any faster, and I can't imagine, because Midpen is many wonderful things, but not fast. So we'll have an August 1st meeting, more likely than not, to work out that letter amongst any other things that are coming up on our agenda then, unless we can afford to wait for the September meeting, and depending upon your travel plans over the summer. Meanwhile, getting closer, more proximately, our June 6th meeting, 3 of us have a conflict at 5 o'clock on June 6th. It's a Jasper Ridge end of the year annual meeting, but it also is the 50th anniversary June 6th end of the year meeting, and or gathering, I should call it. So it's going to carve out the 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock hour. We could scramble over here at 7 for sure. So that is a doable thing. I'm speaking for myself, and I might be speaking for Nona. So we either wait till January 6th at 7 o'clock, unless you want to meet prior to,
We can have that right after Christmas.
did I say January 6th? I mean June, sorry, how can I possibly, I love the month of June. Maybe it's a January agenda item is what I'm thinking about. All right, so June the 6th. So that might be more palatable. Otherwise, I was looking at May the 21st or May 23rd. I believe those were the other 2 dates that I could come up with at 5 o'clock. May 21st is 5 o'clock only. May 23rd, a Thursday, could be at 5 or 7. This, I've checked the town calendar.
Do you want to use the May date, to draft a brief memo?
Mhm. You prefer the May dates?
I do.
All right.
Because to me, there's a couple of things. One is, whether they have access or not. And if they do, they borrow it, and then they, the town is investing in the open space fund. Taking away, that contribution, I think is, the reason for, a mutiny. The other one is that utilizing those funds, for, some short, mid, and long-range investments makes total sense to me, rather than just, having them sit and save.
Harry, you're nodding your head. Could you make May 23rd or 21st? May 23rd. Gary? Pardon me? Oh, you are so flexible. I appreciate that a lot. Bev too? May 23rd? Okay, great. All right, then Terry, in deference to your calendar and getting here, would you prefer, May 23rd is open. So we can do a 7 o'clock if you prefer it, or we can do a 5:30, which would give you a little more room. That sound good? No, I mean, why don't we do 5:30 on then on the 23rd?
I don't think
And
the agenda's been put very.
yeah, exactly. We don't want to be walking out when you arrive. Okay. Great.
That's right in the middle of dinner.
I will send you a note about that. 5:30, Thursday, May 23rd. And I will send a note to the town. It will be called a special meeting because anything that isn't 5 o'clock on the first Thursday is special. All right, then may I hear, anything else before I ask for a motion to adjourn?
I moved to adjourn.
Well, Bev had her, did you want to move to adjourn, Bev, or say something before we adjourn? Okay. Okay, great. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, committee. Thank you, Dave and Catherine.